This is Health, Safety, and Welfare, a show brought to you by the Coalition of Healthcare Professionals. And the topic for today's show is the Fracking Truth. Today we have in studio Dr. Joseph Cohen, Dr. Denise Clark, Rhonda Aiken, and Cliff Wilming, nurses. I'm Dr. Tom Groover, and I'm your host. Also, we have on the line Shane Davis, a researcher, and we would like to touch in with Shane fairly soon here. So, Shane, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, Tom, I'm here.
Excellent. We are the Coalition of Concerned Healthcare Professionals, and we're a Colorado-based independent grassroots movement of healthcare professionals concerned with the protection, restoration, and advancement of public health, community and civil rights, and social and environmental justice. We support the citizens' right to protect their health, the integrity of their environment, and the quality of their life. In addition, we support the initiatives of professional organizations such as the American Nurses Association and the Medical Society of the State of New York, calling for state and nationwide moratoria on fracking. The Coalition of Concerned Healthcare Professionals also supports the Colorado fracking moratoriums throughout Colorado and Community Bill of Rights to ban fracking in Lafayette, Colorado. Shane, could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name is Shane Davis. I'm a research biologist, and for the last 3.5 years, I've been sort of a data miner of official Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission documents and data. What I do is I take the data, I analyze it, correlate trends, and do temporal studies to show in various ways how the state of Colorado and the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, the industry and the state, have both failed to prevent adverse impacts to the environment and to the citizens of Colorado. So that's essentially what I've been doing for the last 3.5 years.
You have an amazing website. It's fractivist.com, is that right?
Yes, that's correct, fractivist.com.
And that's kind of your archive, I think, is from what I've seen, because you have tons of pictures, amazing pictures about fracking going up around playgrounds and schools and around people's houses, and all sorts of links to data and things that you have written. Can you describe for us what is fracking?
Sure. Fracking is an unconventional method. It's a last-ditch effort to extract the remaining fossil fuels that reside in subsurface shale formations. The unconventional method of hydraulic fracturing uses millions of gallons of drinkable, potable municipal waters and hundreds of thousands of gallons of toxic, carcinogenic, and endocrine-disrupting chemicals and sands at extreme high pressures, forcing these liquids and chemicals down into the shale formation to crack open the shale formation to actually release the mineral of choice, whether it's oil and or gas or both.
So let me ask you this. I've seen you around town at times, and you have a T-shirt that says Fractivist. Can you tell us what a fractivist is?
Sure. It's kind of it's a new breed of activism. It's sort of this natural evolution of understanding how unconventional and how harmful the methods of hydraulic fracturing are to the environment and to the citizens across the globe. And so fracking itself and being an activist, an environmental activist, it's just the synergy of being a fractivist, where I completely oppose all methods of unconventional oil and gas hydraulic fracturing processes, and it shouldn't exist. We don't need those fossil fuels. So Fractivist was born about 3 years ago, but I just recently came out a couple years ago using the name.
Well, thanks. I have a question here from one of our panel here, Cliff Wilming, nurse that works in intensive care, right?
That's correct. We work at the trauma surgical ICU. Shane, I was just wondering, how did you get your start in this? Clearly, no one was born a fractivist. How is a fractivist made?
Yeah, I think it's a natural awareness, and it's becoming of being aware of what's really happening. I was a research biologist just doing my day-to-day job. I got a phone call from some person, some nice lady, asking me if I could dig up some information on a fracking pad near her house. And I sat there and I thought, what's a fracking pad? So she gave me the state's link to their website. And I started digging around, and I realized that the state's website was extremely cumbersome and very oppressive, meaning that I personally believe, after mapping out the entire state's website, that the information is so suppressed from the general public that it's an absolute disservice to the public. So I took it upon myself for about 6 months to figure everything out, find this nice lady some data, but then I realized I had a gold mine of information that really proved that hydraulic fracturing in Colorado was gravely dangerous to the environment and to the citizens of Colorado. And these types of exposés that I put on my blog, fractivist.com, I show clearly that the state has failed to do that. So, I mean, when I sat there and saw that I had millions of documents, I couldn't put it down, because I think it was Einstein who said, if you have a privilege to know, you have a duty to act. So a fractivist was born, because if you've got a moral obligation, I think you're a fractivist.
Shane, the media and government portray activists as fringe extremist types, anti-establishment, troublemaking idealists. What is your view of the role of activists in society?
I think the role of activists in society are those people who speak the truth. And, these oligarchies or oligarchies, imperialists, they control manufacturing, and they also control consumerism. And so when you have somebody like an activist who actually speaks the truth, it gets in their way of progress and their bottom line, their pocketbook. And so, they're going to call us all kinds of names, when in fact we're highly intellectual, we're very educated, and we would love to have these types of intellectual discourse with them, but they label us so that they can create the debate that we don't know what we're talking about, when in fact we are the voice of truth.
Thanks. Colorado recently suffered a really terrible flood, and the world has really been saddened by the images we've seen of washed out fracking wells and detached well condensate tanks. And you've witnessed and documented these events, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely. I was fortunate to go up in the air 5 times and be on the ground a couple dozen times, cataloging photographs, locations, different types of spills. But it was a really horrific scene to know that this torrential rain that we had, this freak storm, as it were, plowed its way right through the epicenter, the highest active oil and gas density in the entire United States, the epicenter, but also right through the 6th largest agricultural area in the United States. So being up in the air and being on the ground, it's just shocking to see the sheer devastation of about 2,000 oil and gas well pads that were active, and seeing the tanks toppled over, petrochemical sheens on the surface of the waters flowing down. It really proves that the state regulations were not prepared and didn't design their regulations around worst case scenarios. So it's an epic failure of the state and the industry to prevent adverse impacts both to humans and the environment.
Cliff, you were out in the flood taking pictures and talking to people. What was your experience?
Well, my experience was, it was almost serendipity. I had an idea that Weld County was that densely drilled, and I live in Lafayette, which is about 15, 20 minutes drive from Weld County. And, after a night shift, I basically started to wonder if the floodwaters were going to have some degree of influence on the major amount of gas and oil extraction out there. So, really it came down to getting in my car and driving out to Weld County. It took me about an hour and a half that day due to the floodwaters to even get into the county. But what I saw was just about your worst nightmare. And it went from bad to worse out there. So, as you got these tributaries of these major waterways that would converge, because of the density of drilling out in Weld County, along any floodplain, you see hundreds of wells. This activity is every direction that you could possibly look. So it was a very small amount of time before you started to see that the floodwaters had crashed straight into this infrastructure, that the infrastructure was starting to become compromised, the condensate tanks were starting to tilt, and it didn't take a whole lot of calculation to start to figure how big or dangerous these conditions were going to be in Weld County. So, my photographs came out of there, and really, I think that I could almost say that I was part of breaking a national news story. So since that time, we've been able to get, bigger, more experienced people on the ground there to really kind of start to figure out the full extent of what the damage is.
Yes, I was sitting in my living room and my wife shouted out, "Cliff, it's Cliff!" And I looked on the TV and it was one of your photos with your credit on the Rachel Maddow show. So you made it on national television.
Yeah, well, and Shane can talk about this too. It's really been just weeks of intense media attention, where this activity in Weld County has not received that kind of attention before. But we have arranged flights for CNN, for CBS National News. It just goes on and on because people are starting to wake up and they're starting to really feel that the environment is not an abstraction. This is something that is clearly starting to impact us daily in the way we live. So I also got in Rolling Stone. I think that was probably the high water mark, no pun intended, I guess.
Shane, the gas and oil industry and state government and the media reports that a small amount of oil was spilled and diluted by the floodwater, and there has been little or no mention of the methane and fracking chemicals, which obviously leaked into the environment. Do you think this is an intentional way of disguising a damage which has occurred to the fracking wells and the harms which have occurred to humans and the environment?
Absolutely. I believe it's not only that, it's very disingenuous of the state and COGA, the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, to come out and say, there are hardly any spills, and the 47,000 gallons of petrochemicals and 18,000 gallons of produced waters that they've captured, that they know of, volume-wise, have spilled into the waters. They do say that the billions of gallons of waters are going to dilute it, but there are a couple of things I'd like to address. One is that dilution is the solution to pollution, and the industry uses that as their alibi every single time, whether it's in the air, the water, and or the soil. And so when you have the surface problems, the destruction like what we saw, it wasn't the tip of the iceberg that sank the Titanic. It was the enormity of the infrastructure below. And so with the oil and gas industry, in 2,000 approximately oil and gas wells that were impacted, they have hundreds and hundreds of miles and thousands of miles of petro flow lines and pipes that move toxic industrial waste all over the place. These flow lines are generally about 3 feet below the ground surface. And so now when the water is receding, that infrastructure, that bottom of the iceberg, is actually showing its face. So when Tisha Schiller says that, this is a drop in the bucket, we're intelligent enough to know that even some chemicals can actually, a single drop or teaspoon can contaminate an Olympic-sized swimming pool to lethal dosage. So I think it's very, very reckless for the state to come out and say that when in fact they don't have the capability to understand how many hundreds of thousands of gallons or millions of gallons of toxic industrial waste, endocrine disrupting chemicals have been flowing freely down into the South Platte River, into Nebraska, into the environment, into people's drinking waters and the groundwater. And so this is something that they can't control. The only way they can calculate volumes is by going out there with absorbent booms or the vacuum trucks and suck up the liquid. Then they can quantify it. So I think Todd Hartman, the spokesman of the COGCC, said it nicely. He said it perfectly. He said, vast majority of those wells out in there and in the destruction zone we can't get to because they're underwater. Well, he's absolutely right, because you failed to prepare and plan for worst-case scenarios. So the big question is, how much of the infrastructure is compromised right now and still discharging these chemicals into the environment?
Shane, this is Cliff. I had another question for you. What we're getting a lot is talk about the spilling of crude oil, and to people that don't know what produced water is, I've said that produced water sounds like water that's produced from your faucet, perhaps. Could you address the idea that there's more to these well sites than just crude oil? And could you maybe tell the listeners a bit about what produced water actually is?
Sure. Produced water is a term that the oil and gas industry uses to describe the water that they encounter below the ground when the water comes back up after they've hydraulically fractured. So there are types of water underground that already pre-exist, 7,000, 8,000 feet, and shallower. But keep in mind, produced water mixes with the chemicals, those carcinogenic and endocrine-disrupting chemicals that are used in the hydraulic fracturing process. So it's a mixture that comes up from waters that pre-exist underground, which can contain NORM, which are naturally occurring radioactive materials, and other chemicals, to include all of the fracking fluids that the industry has used. So it's this mixture of toxic industrial waste that gets stored on site. And in your pictures, Cliff, and seeing up in the air and on the ground as well, you can see those produced water vaults, or those tanks that were just lifted up out of the ground, tilted on their side. And even Tisha Schuller said on CBS that there are known tanks that contain flowback also. Now I'm going to describe flowback to you. Flowback is fracking fluid. She stated that on CBS that fracking fluid was also released into the water. So here we go. We have COGA, COGA, saying that fracking fluids were released into the rivers to include produced waters and also crude oil. So you have a huge mixture of all those contaminants that have been mixed into the rivers and the environment.
This is Health, Safety, and Welfare, a show brought to you by Coalition of Concerned Healthcare Professionals. Today's show is The Fracking Truth. Shane, I would like to hook you up with Denise Clark here. She is a naturopathic doctor, but also has done quite a bit of work with the Environmental Protection Agency. Denise, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. I have a 20-year history working for the EPA in Denver and Seattle and also in Washington, D.C. And then I went back to school, a 4-year program in naturopathic medicine, and got my doctorate and have been practicing here in Colorado for the last 12 years.
I'd like to know what you all think about the research studies that have been conducted here in Colorado. I know there was one done by the Colorado School of Public Health, and another one done by NOAA, and another one done by Dr. Colburn. And the concern I have is there's very little research done, and there's a lot that we know from what's been done, but there's a huge amount we don't know. And can you give us a perspective on that?
So there have been two main studies, health effects studies, and they've both been done in Garfield County. As you know, Garfield County has about 5,000 wells, and it's a rural community. And the only other industry out there other than oil and gas is farming, agriculture. And so what Theo Colburn's study did was she showed that there's an enormous amount of there's basically, in terms of air emissions, which is probably the route that most people are exposed to in terms of being close to oil and gas. And she showed that hydrocarbons that can contribute to ozone, there's probably about 30 to 50 different hydrocarbons being released, as well as benzenes, which are known carcinogens, and these endocrine disruptors. And so that people are being affected in that live near these oil and gas. And there's really, in terms of exposure, in terms of Garfield County, there's no other main sources of exposure other than these oil and gas fields. The other study was done by the CU, McKenzie and Appgate, and they looked at Garfield County as well. And they looked at actually distances from oil and gas wells, and they found that people living within a half mile are being, most health effects are lung effects, neurological effects. You think of dizziness, headaches, and lung effects, asthma, shortness of breath. And then people even a mile away from these oil and gas fields are being affected lung and neurological. And there's also an increased risk of cancer is what they found. So we are finding some health effects here in Colorado. Both studies their conclusion was that we need a bigger health effects study here in Colorado, and hopefully that'll make its way through the state legislature next year, we're hoping.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. So I've got 4 studies. One, you touched on Dr. Brown's study in NOAA that came out at the end of 2011, which was first publicly known in 2012 in Erie when Dr. Brown talked about possibly causality. Basically, the certain amount of chemicals that were being released from these well site areas were only found from the byproducts of oil and gas activities. And so that was the first one that kind of shocked everyone. And then the Colorado School of Public Health, as you mentioned, and Dr. Colborn's AIR manuscript in December of 2012. But there was one other one, which was done by the CDPHE December 5th, 2012. Now, this one is about 58 pages long, but it's a beautiful report done by the state because what it did was it confirmed Dr. Colborn's report, it confirmed Lisa McKenzie's report, and NOAA's study. Essentially, what the CDPHE did, the Colorado Public Health and Division and Environment, Department of Environment Health study showed was they did a study of control in Denver, and then they went to Erie, and then they went north of where I lived in Platteville, which is in Weld County. The study was based on the aggregation of well pads, meaning how many well bores were on a single well pad. And so in Denver, kind of being the control, they had a laundry list of all of these chemicals that were potentially found and were found by, let's say, the byproducts of benzene from cars, emissions, and industry. That study was then done in Erie, which only has 19,000 people, which is very small compared to Denver, and it showed that those emissions were 10 times greater in Erie than in Denver. So then they moved up to Platteville, and those studies were shown to be 14 times greater than were found in Denver. And so what it did is it showed causality of chemical signature increases based on aggregation of well bores on well pads. Because in Erie, they've got anywhere from 4 to 6 well pads or well bores on a well pad average. Then when you move up north into Weld County, you get to about 8 to 10 well bores per well pad. So it was a great confirmation that the state did to really confirm Dr. Colborn's AIR manuscript and Lisa McKenzie's report as well.
That kind of goes along with what I'm sensing in my own life. You know, I moved here originally to Colorado for the fresh air and the sunshine. And I intentionally chose to set up a practice in Boulder, Colorado, because I saw the brown smoke over Denver and thought, well, that's probably not a good place to live. And it turns out it's much safer to live in Denver, Colorado now than it is in Boulder from an air quality standpoint. And if you live in Erie, you're really asking for it. I'm wondering, the oil and gas industry apparently wants to install or drill and operate something like 1,800 new wells in East Boulder County that are supposed to go up between I-25 and 76th Street in Boulder, Colorado, running all the way through Lafayette. And it disturbs me to think that, the air quality will be much, much worse than, say, Los Angeles or practically any place else.
That's absolutely correct. Even in Weld County alone being the highest density of active wells in the United States, having over 21,000 active oil and gas wells, those emissions, those toxic emissions, are actually exempt under the Clean Air Act for the most part, largely unregulated, because these well pads are considered a minor non-point source of pollution. And so wherever those toxins go, wherever the wind goes, the toxins go. And so we as the citizens and as environmental activists, people who are concerned, should consider that air trespassing. Those toxins from heavy industry are now in your backyard, and you are forced to breathe them because through the federal exemptions that the oil and gas industry lavishes in, where our civil rights to safety and protection, they were stripped. So there's nothing we can do. And the Greater Wattenberg Formation, the shale formation that's being targeted that you just mentioned about, going into the eastern portion of Boulder County, is perfect for the industry to set up. So truly, that industry should not, number one, should not be in residential areas, but it is poisoning us against our will.
I want to bring up another point on these toxic emissions, these VOCs that we're seeing in a high concentration, also lead to the formation of ozone. And the Front Range now, which includes Denver, Boulder, parts of Weld County, Larimer County, are now a non-attainment area. They don't meet the air quality standard for ozone, meaning that we're already breathing dangerous levels of ozone. And ozone is very dangerous. It can damage our lungs, cause inflammation. It can damage heart. It can cause arrhythmias. It can affect birth, cause birth defects. If you go on EPA's website, they list all the potential damage effects of ozone. And the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission has come out and admitted that oil and gas is a significant source of VOCs contributing to ozone, and it's only going to increase. We saw some data last night at our talk in Broomfield. It showed that, these major, we used to think of ozone as a pollution from cities, from LA, from Denver, and now we're seeing it in these rural areas like rural Utah. I mean, they've exceeded the ozone standard. They've doubled it there, and there's very few cars. So this is a big threat to our communities right now and needs to be addressed.
But that area in Utah does have drilling.
Right, yes, heavy drilling.
Yeah, that's the point.
And I have some good friends that moved to Pinedale. They left California because they thought that Pinedale, Wyoming would be a nice, clean place to live. And now we know Pinedale is fracking central. And, a town of 1,200 people is violating the ozone standard. And it's really hard to leave those towns now. No one wants to move there.
Yeah. This is Rhonda. We have an abundance of sunlight here in Colorado, and it's known that the VOCs and other gases coming off of the rigs interact with sunlight to increase the levels of ozone. And it's been shown by atmospheric research how high those levels go, that they've far exceeded the EPA established range for safety in this region or any region where fracking is prevalent.
Rhonda, you and Cliff are nurses, and you must be concerned about that incident where there was a nurse in Colorado who was contaminated by fracking fluid when she was treating a fracking fluid exposed patient. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. There was a nurse in Durango working in the emergency room of Mercy Regional Medical Center. A few years ago, she was exposed for about 10 minutes to a gas field worker who showed up in the emergency room with his clothes damp from some hydraulic fracturing fluid. And what she reported was that within minutes of inhaling those fumes, she lost her sense of smell. The ER was locked down. They started ventilating the room, but by the time the nurse went home after her shift, she still couldn't smell anything. She developed a headache, and then a week later, her heart, liver, and lungs shut down, and she was hospitalized in their intensive care unit. It took her many years to recover enough to consider herself recovered from the 10-minute exposure that she suffered. So I'm not naming her name right now because I think she's stepped back. There are a lot of people who have been exposed in various ways are subject to secrecy and what do you call those, Cliff? There's
I think a gag order would
gag
be.
orders, settlements with oil and gas industry. So this kind of thing makes me feel really concerned that a lot of people don't come forward. And there's also the issue of the Form 35, which I'm hoping Dr. Cohen can talk to us about, that prevents medical professionals, doctors and nurses from knowing what workers have been exposed to, from knowing what the public has been exposed to in the event of an exposure. And in the case of this nurse in southern Colorado, what she was exposed to. During her treatment, the doctors treating her were not permitted to know what they were treating her for. They just knew that it was some generic form of toxic exposure, and that delayed her getting appropriate treatment. So, of course, I feel very concerned, and it's one of the things that stimulated me to become a fractivist. And in addition to that, the Pennsylvania Nurses Association drafted a resolution which was eventually adopted in 2012 by the American Nurses Association, calling for a moratorium on further gas and oil drilling, exploration, any activities that affect the environment in the way that they've seen in Pennsylvania. And the Medical Society in the state of New York adopted a similar policy, and they're both calling for the moratorium, not just in their own states but nationwide, because of the great public health concerns. I think Joe has some things that he can speak to the Form 35 issue from the physician's perspective.
Actually, on Form 35, I think you've covered that quite well, but from a physician perspective, it's very difficult when you run into situations where there might be some toxicity, some chemicals that you need to check on to see what's going on with the patient so you can treat them, but you're not allowed to go there. So we are restricted as practitioners in disclosing what these chemicals are, and we have a difficult time trying to figure out what they are to begin with. On top of that, I've been checking with labs and can't get a straight answer from labs about what we should have available is actually fracking panel, a panel that we can order for patients to see if they've been exposed, what their exposure level is, so we can actually study what's going on. The oil and gas industry in the state of Colorado is making that very difficult for us. Just so you're aware, my specialty has been OBGYN. I've delivered probably about 10,000 babies, many in this area here in Colorado. Was chairman of the Department of OBGYN and Pediatrics at Longmont United Hospital and worked out of a few hospitals in the area. I currently practice what's called functional medicine, which actually goes into looking for triggers of disease, what's actually causing disease to begin with. And it's very frustrating when you see what's going on here in our communities. I happen to live in Erie right now and very concerned about what I'm seeing just in my own neighborhood. I think that we have several issues to deal with. Just from an OBGYN perspective, we have pregnant women, young children who, if you think that adults react to these toxic chemicals, well, children and pregnant women, unborn fetuses, react a whole lot more than we do because they're in a very formative stage of development, and that's where it has a major impact on health. So I just wanted to let you know that it's been a real eye-opening experience for me getting involved with the fracking movement. I'm very early into this, went to a Unity Church meeting and got involved, and we're hoping to get other healthcare practitioners involved with our group.
It's very unfortunate. I mean, there really is no established medical protocols for diagnosing fracking exposures and working with fracking exposed patients. I mean, like you said, there's no blood panel that we can just order to know if these things exist. Is that right? Would everyone agree with that?
You know, I can say that I worked in emergency departments both in Chicago and in Wheat Ridge, Colorado. You know, a lot of the symptoms that patients would typically come in would be something that would confuse any medical professionals. So headache, nausea, GI problems, blurred vision, dizziness. You know, these are routine symptoms that you would see in any ER anywhere in the country. So, you know, for any medical professionals to draw the line between oil and gas exposure and the symptoms of this individual, it can be very difficult because we don't have training because of the lack of public exposure of this industry. I would like to say one other thing too. Going through the COGCC website, this is the largest This is the authority over oil and gas development in Colorado, and one night, probably around 11 or 12 o'clock, I was going through the site and I did see the Form 35, and this is the confidentiality agreement that healthcare professionals are expected to sign, which vows not to release any information of what the industry considers a proprietary formula for the fracking fluids in the event of human exposure or contamination. And what you see up on the COGCC site is that the original document that the state wanted to put out was open for public commentary. What essentially occurred was the Colorado Oil and Gas Association and the Colorado Petroleum Association took that document and put it through a full line item editing, colored, slash marks, full paragraphs stricken, new ones entered, and then the final document that the COGCC came out with mirrored identically the suggested edits of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. So it's utterly fair to say that confidentiality agreement that is regulating medical professionals in being able to discuss in a public sense what people are being contaminated with was fully written by the industry.
And might mention that confidentiality agreement is in place because the fracking oil and gas industry has decided that their chemicals that they inject, the poisonous chemicals they inject into the ground, are patented, and so therefore they have to protect their patents. Is that correct?
That's the stated claim, Tom. It also serves the purpose of not riling the public up.
That's correct.
So, and I would like to also kind of mirror what Rhonda had said too. The Colorado, the Coalition of Concerned Healthcare Professionals. We have a Facebook page. You can find us there. We are really encouraging that other people within the medical community and the healthcare profession join us on this. This is an enormous environmental and public health issue, and we need as many healthcare professionals to join us in this. It's really about protecting public health, and I think everybody's license is very clear about what our role should be in that.
This is Health, Safety, and Welfare, a show brought to you by Coalition of Concerned Healthcare Professionals. Today's show is The Fracking Truth.
Go ahead, Shane.
I was just going to add one more piece. One of the big reasons why these chemicals are proprietary is it's not because they've got this Coca-Cola recipe per se. It's that under the Resource Conservation Recovery Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Air Act, those liquids that go down the wellbore have been classified as non-hazardous. So if they were to remove this type of disclosure, they would probably have a huge amount of chemicals that are extremely hazardous that would not qualify to be exempt under those federal exemptions. So there might be a couple reasons why they're actually considered proprietary. Because imagine if we knew what those chemicals were, and Dr. Colborn's got a beautiful list, and all the symptoms that and how those chemicals actually affect the human body. If we knew what those chemicals were, and there were no proprietary secrets on them, I lived in the gas patch for 2 years. I had a bloody nose for a year and a half, GI problems, burning eyes. I know all of that. These are not anecdotal. These are factual observations. I go to you, the doctor, and tell you, here are my problems. Can you help me? And so you have no real book to go by. And so I agree with all of you that this is a failure. It's very unconstitutional. It's absolutely inhumane that there is a gag order and that Form 35 should be abolished completely.
Shane, you mentioned Dr. Colburn's data on all these chemicals. Where would people find more information on Dr. Colburn's work?
Sure. She's the president and CEO of the Endocrine Disruption Exchange, and you can go online and type in TEDx, the Endocrine Disruption Exchange. All the information is on there, and she's great if you need to call her. Probably stand in line, but she's pretty good about getting back to you as well.
I just want to mention that there is a voluntary list that industry uses to post chemicals that are used in fracking. It's voluntary, but there are almost 600 chemicals on that list right now. So if someone walks into a hospital that's been affected by some fracking materials, how would a medical doctor know from that list of 500 or 600 chemicals what actually is affecting that person? And they're not specific to the area, they're just national. I mean, there may be some chemicals that are used in one locale that aren't used in another location. So there really needs to be more done in terms of disclosure in terms of locality. I mean, where they're using those chemicals.
That's a great point. That website is actually nothing but a public pacifier, and it's a voluntary system that the industry uses to tell, or at least appear to the general public, that we're doing good things. We're putting these chemicals online because we want you to feel safe and warm and fuzzy. But in fact, I actually juxtaposed that industry's website. I'm not even going to give it a name because it's worthless. I juxtaposed that database with the COGCC's database and all of their completion reports that show chemicals and the volumes of chemicals that are being used. And the industry's website is skewed 3-to-1. So it's absolutely erroneous, and it's absolutely non-meaningful data to anybody. And to your point, you make an incredibly important point in that if we knew where this patient came from, let's say they were at this well site location, they were working there, or if somebody lived by that one, we would need that complete database of chemicals from that specific well site so that the practitioners and nurses, could effectively understand what chemicals are being used at that specific location and help the patient. So, it's a disservice to the public.
Yeah. And I'd like to just add that the chemicals that we are aware of are extremely toxic, and there's an interesting list that the Preventive Medicine and Family Health Committee of the Medical Society of the State of New York published recently on in an update on hydraulic fracturing. And just to name 2 or 3, there's arsenic, which is a group 1 carcinogen. It causes adenocarcinoma of the lung, leukemia, and lymphomas. There's benzene. It's a carcinogen in experiments. It causes leukemia and also non-cancer neurological effects. There is ethylene glycol, also known as antifreeze, and that's found in contaminated water. It's a neurotoxin. It affects the kidneys and the heart and the lungs. Low dose effects are eye, nose, and throat irritation. So like Cliff said, somebody could show up with just some generic symptoms of an upper respiratory infection and actually be suffering the early stages of a neurotoxic or cardiopulmonary disorder that is going to show up later. And that's one of the things that we don't have enough of is good data, good studies that show us not just the short-term exposure effects, health effects, but the mid and the long range progression post exposure. And in all this discussion about exposure, I feel like we really need to be talking about prevention, and that's where the precautionary principle comes in. Being a nurse, we're reading the literature coming out of the American Nurses Association, and back in 2003, the ANA adopted the precautionary principle as a basic tenet of public health, and based on the precautionary principle, they're advocating again that we roll back all this drilling and instead put our efforts on putting public health first, and going into clean energy, exploring what can be done to prevent creating further toxins, releasing further toxins. I mean, if you think about it, when they talk about how clean gas is. They're talking about just a sliver of the whole production cycle. If you just expand the viewfinder and look at the bigger picture, it's toxic, but they really try to drive our attention to just a narrow sliver of the whole process. And there's something else that I think is important for us all to remember in terms of public health is we all live upstream and downstream of toxins. We're all upwind and downwind. And when they talk about disposal and putting something away, where is away? There is no away on this planet. We're all on this planet. And just locally, we're in this region, and as the flood showed us, we're sending toxins from one area down to another. So we really are all in this together.
Cliff, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the human rights issues associated with the fracking of our communities here in Colorado. I think many of us are disheartened by the oil and gas industry's claims to the mineral rights which exist underneath our homes and our playgrounds and our hospitals and our children's schools and things like that, and they want to come in and lay claim to those rights and expose us and to the chemical exposures which can disrupt our health and make us unsafe in many ways, destroy our welfare. So, I'm just concerned about this. I know that you've been active in establishing a fracking ban in Lafayette.
That's correct.
That is a community rights-based ban. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, in Lafayette, as our geographical position is basically on the edge of the Wattenberg Shale. So this activity tends to run from east to west across the shale. So what you're getting now is you're getting this activity that's really kind of washing into all of the Front Range communities, everywhere from Fort Collins all the way down to Denver. And, when we first moved to Lafayette, it was really to have a nice, clean, safe area to raise our two little kids. And, I've had a background in political activism, but, really we hadn't expected to find this here. We didn't really know what hydraulic fracturing was until it was the mothers up in Erie that started a protest against the drilling very close to their Red Hawk Elementary School there. So that was last summer. And, what people don't really see when they first started to look at this, they start to look at this issue is that, we're all under the idea that this is a free democratic society and that people are valuable and the public health is the highest good and that we can make determinations that show what kind of world that we want to live in. And, I know that even coming from Chicago, I was utterly naive to think that as I looked for protection from this activity that was going to slowly threaten my area of Colorado, I looked immediately to the elected officials. I looked to my town council or my city council. We looked to the Boulder County commissioners all the way to the state government. And what we found was that the people, by and large, are all alone in this. The industries, and I can be talking about hydraulic fracturing and oil and gas, but I can also be talking about uranium mining or strip mining or any other corporate project you could think of. The law has been written by those industries. The law is structured so that those industries and their quarry, which is in this case gas and oil, take precedence over any community democratic voice or vote. Those laws take precedence over state laws, and they are geared to get those industries to what they want. And so, really, as you do the calculation about hydraulic fracturing and really what has to take place in order to protect us from it, the problem starts to move beyond an environmental issue and starts to become a civil rights issue. So in Lafayette, we have started a ballot initiative. We're a home rule community so that we can put issues to a direct vote of the community without the permission of the city council. And in July of this year, we turned in over 2,000 names of registered voters in Lafayette to place a direct vote to the Lafayette community for the Lafayette Community Rights Act to ban hydraulic fracturing. And, we're one of many communities. Broomfield is going for a moratorium. Boulder is going for a 5-year moratorium. Loveland, Fort Collins. So Lafayette has taken a very direct approach to this. And the way we feel about it is that, well, for one, we have to protect the public health. And so our Community Rights Act bans hydraulic fracturing, it bans all oil and gas extraction, and it bans the disposal of associated industrial waste within Lafayette. But the way that it does this is kind of a unique approach, and it's an approach that's really been championed by the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, and we are one of 150 communities around the country that has considered this sort of approach, in that we don't just simply say we're going to make it illegal. We establish a full community bill of rights, which includes the right to clean air, clean water, and full self-determination and freedom from chemical trespass. And really what our act does is it safeguards the public health through banning hydraulic fracturing, but it also goes very confrontationally against the corporate laws that claim that mineral interests supersede community rights and democracy and the public health.
If this ban goes into place, it's going to have an effect on Colorado law too, won't it?
Well, it's going to be quite experimental, actually. One of these acts has never been attempted in Colorado. So if Lafayette passes a Community Rights Act with this kind of legal documentation or language, we honestly don't know what's going to happen. The oil and gas activity has just flailed at Lafayette. They've claimed that we are going to force the shutoff of natural gas to all the homes. They claim that you can jail your neighbor if he paints his house. They have had protests against the Community Rights Act to force it off of the ballot that have failed. So, really, the way we kind of look at this is it's more than just a legal solution. We need to start a genuine community movement. This is a civil rights moment for our country, and we need to bring the community's full involvement in this. This isn't something that's going to get solved by lawyers.
So already I understand that the oil and gas industry is starting to ramp up, their opposition to this initiative in Lafayette, and I understand there's a large group of volunteers that are going around door to door talking to all the members of the community, explaining really what's going on, and that the city commissioners actually passed a resolution condemning the fracking ban.
That's correct. The Lafayette City Council has been characterized by mass confusion around this issue ever since we raised it to them. This time last year, they didn't even know how many wells were operating within the city. But the Lafayette City Council, by and large, does not mind if they do not know the answer to a question. They still feel like they can provide some information, whether it's correct or not. And when you read the resolution, it actually reads quite sad. And really, through our interaction with the community, people want to live in Lafayette. They love the place. They're very proud of it. And we don't feel that the city council, unfortunately, holds a whole lot of relevancy when it comes to protecting the public health there.
So as citizens, not just healthcare practitioners and professionals, what can we do? What can we do to protect our community's health, safety, and welfare?
Well, I'd say this is going to be a matter of organizing towards a critical mass where the public's voice and its sentiment outweigh the political influence of the oil and gas industry. There's organizations all up and down the Front Range. I would suggest you get onto Shane's page. It's incredibly informative. Of course, if you're Lafayette, you call East Boulder County United, go on Facebook. There's a lot of resources and a lot of organizing taking place, and we need everybody.
Well, that's wonderful. Shane, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
You've heard the discussion since we last spoke with you. Do you have anything else to add to what's been said tonight?
No, other than this is really, the whole fight about fracking. We know that it's a largely exempt industry that actually affects our ways of life, our health, and our absolute future of our children's life, but also the environment, and that it has switched. It is now a civil rights movement, and the only way we can actually topple this largely rogue industry and very toxic industry is with solidarity. We know that we speak the truth. We know we're going to do the right thing. We know we have a moral obligation, and we won't stop. I told Koga the other day on a radio show, prepare yourself. It's going to be a long decade. So I'm quite confident we can change this, but we're going to need everyone to do this.
Thank you, everyone. This has been Health, Safety, and Welfare, a show brought to you by Coalition of Concerned Healthcare Professionals. The title of our show has been The Fracking Truth.